Hey everybody, my name is Eric and welcome to the first of 2 Wednesday subsweeks on the Pagan Perspective in the month of August as we celebrate 10 years of the collab. Our question for this week comes from Katniss Kern, who is asking for our perspective on having patrons/matrons from different pantheons. And there's 2 ways that I can interpret this question. I'm not sure which one they mean. It could either be, can you have, if you work in multiple systems, say you work with Greek gods and you work with Egyptian gods, would you have a patron in each of those systems? Or do they mean, can you have a Greek goddess and an Egyptian god as your patron and matron? So those are different questions, so I'm not sure which one they mean, but I'll try to answer both of them as best I can. I think that, for the first question, if you're working multiple systems, you probably would have a patron in each of those systems. At least that's been my experience working with different systems, is that I seem to have, that god or that goddess that I resonate with the most within those different systems. That said, patronage, that term, in the ancient world, and I'm sure Angelo will probably touch on this, because he knows more about, the Greek history than I do. So, that was more about, patronage was more about what you did, your role in society, than it was about, what god resonated with you the most, or what god you had a strong relationship with. It was about what you did, what your role was. If you're an author, your patron was Hermes, for example. So I think that, and extending that, if you worked in multiple systems, if you're an author, you've got Hermes in the Greek system, you've got Thoth in the Egyptian system, so you would have those different patrons from those different systems, based on your role in society. I don't think that's really how it's used, though, so much in the modern neo-pagan movement, though. That's definitely more about, what god you have a strong relationship with or you resonate with, regardless of what you do with your day-to-day life. On the topic of, having a god from one system and a goddess from another, I'm in 2 minds about it, to be honest. Part of me says, don't mix your drinks. If you're working one system, just work that system. If you want to work another system, just work that system. Don't mix the 2. That would generally be my approach to things. That's how I would go to things. I would normally, if I'm working with a spirit for the first time, research them. How were they worshipped historically? What did people offer to them? What incantations were used to summon them? All of those sorts of things. If you're working with goetic demons, use the goetia. That's sort of my approach of how I would approach things. That said, if the spirits that you're working with are from dead religions, they may not have, a corpus that you can actually go to figure out how they were worshipped and what rituals they used and things like that. So you may have to, reconstruct and fill in the gaps as best you can, I suppose. So, if you're doing that, if you're working with a god from a dead system, and they give you some sort of UPG and they tell you, Hecate comes to you and goes, yeah, you should get Thoth on this altar with me, if your spirits are saying that, I would say definitely, go with what your spirits say. Because, if you're, as well, nobody's going to tell you that you're wrong if you hold that tenet of keep silent, that tenet of the mysteries of the Sphinx, witch's pyramid or magician's pyramid, whatever name you like to go by. So if you're keeping silent, nobody's going to know anyway, so just do you, boo-boo. There is some nuance there, though. If you're interested in working with a spirit from a living tradition, something that has, a long-standing priesthood, I would definitely say, go and study with somebody who's in that religion, in that tradition. Go and do it properly, if you're interested in something that has a living tradition. If you want to work with Ganesha, you might like to go and actually attend Hindu pujas or whatever, to actually, be part of that tradition and engage in that in the proper way, instead of, casting your Wiccan circle and calling Ganesha into it. I would definitely always say, go with the tradition that is already established and already works with them. Because, if they have a priesthood, those spirits will probably be telling their priesthood how they want to be worshipped, right? And I think that stands for a lot of, ATRs. I know that they're very in right now. So, if you want to work with a spirit from an ATR, find a priest who can introduce you to them, who can teach you properly, get a divination done, all those sorts of things. You know, I really think that those are the kind of spirits that you really should be introduced to and taught how to work with. So there is nuance there, but I think if you're working with gods from dead religions, as most neo-pagans are, I would definitely say that you should do your best to work with them as they would have been worked with. But if you get UPG, because like you have to remember as well, like going back to the Goetia and the Goetic demons and stuff like that, like I've heard these systems, these processes described as Tinder for spirits. They're just to get you in contact, and once you're in touch with the spirits then teach you and tell you everything you need to know. So I would always, like, if I'm approaching a god for the first time, research them and approach them as I would expect they would want to be approached until they tell me otherwise. That said, you know, there is a lot of historical basis for eclecticism, for mixing traditions, for syncretism. You know, you can look at things like the PGM, the Greek Magical Papyri, and in there you can see, you know, Greek and Egyptian and, you know, Christian or Jewish style god names and all this sort of stuff. So like there's a whole bunch of mixing things, and they just sort of picked up whatever, said it was magical and used it. And I think that there's a lot to be said about that in terms of being a magician and picking up different tricks from different places. You know, we're definitely magpies in that way, I think, and there's no denying that, regardless of what system you work in. So yeah, in short, I guess my response is, if you're in multiple systems, you would probably have multiple patrons. Might be different for different people, but that's been my experience. And if you're working with gods from dead religions, ask them, see if they're okay with it. If they are, awesome. If they're not, well, at least you've asked. And lastly, if you're wanting to work with spirits from living traditions, go and find that, seek out that priesthood, and work with them in the proper ways. That would be my advice, that would be my recommendation, or my perspective on this topic. So I hope that this has answered as best I can, and I hope you guys are all well, and until I speak to you next week, I wish you all the best. Mwah. Bye.